Please subscribe to my channel to learn more about political philosophy. In my most recent book on ideological possession, I tried to explain the difference between that, ideological possession, and real religion, or maybe real faith. Ideological possession is like being hijacked, hence the term possession. It's like being hijacked by a personality, an idea, or a system that seems greater than yourself, but which actually comes from yourself. Jung's theory was that everybody has that shadow. The shadow is capable of doing a lot of things. In particular, it's power hungry. Everybody has the shadow, and when the shadow is projected onto a personality, an idea, or a system, it becomes something greater than yourself. It seems like it anyway, and of course when thousands, if not millions of people believe it, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It does become something greater than oneself. In ideological possession, a person surrenders their freedom to an absolute. As I understand it, at least from the point of view of Christianity, and I would guess probably from all the religions of the book, there is no necessity to surrender your moral freedom in order to have faith. In fact, faith presumes or assumes that you retain that freedom, the freedom to accept or reject. But in ideological possession, a person kind of accepts the enslavement of themselves to this earthly power. I want to try to get across, and this is what I try to do in my book, and this is not a quote from anybody else, this is me, there is no human person, idea, or system that cannot become a god. All need to be held with a skepticism and tenuously, and not with fervor and indelible faith. What we tend to do is we can recognize when ideological possession occurs in others, but we can't recognize when it occurs to ourselves, right? Then we're just right and they're wrong, okay? That is the very essence of the idea. You don't know. You think you're the exception and you think you're absolutely right. What Eugene McCarraher does in chapter, I think it's 27 of The Enchantments of Mammon, is he starts to go into the neoliberal faith, which is no exception to the rule that a human idea can become like a god. So he uses the term neoliberal utopianism because indeed, looking back, that ideology was and is utopian. It holds out utopian promises that no human ideology can fulfill. And these great personalities, Reagan and Thatcher, and Clinton and Tony Blair, a little bit lesser in stature, but still great personalities, they all agreed on this neoliberal utopian vision for the most part. That the free market, really broadly understood to not just mean our economic relationships, but even the way that we deal with each other in government and in society and culture, could be rationalized, could be set free. The powers could be set free, the powers of reason, that self-interest could be turned into something powerfully good for all people. It became a belief system. It became a moral code. And for many people, it became a way of life because of that. In other words, it, like other ideologies, became a religion. So McCarraher basically says, and I agree with him, that American traditionalist conservatism, such as that of Russell Kirk here, was too weak and too undemocratic to ever have any effect in the United States. Too weak because there were far too few people who invested themselves in this kind of traditionalist conservatism, and too anti-democratic, just meaning that they still embrace this idea of kind of a natural aristocracy, right? And kind of suspected that the hoi polloi weren't really up to ruling themselves. This could not go over in a country like the United States. There's a quote from McCarraher here. He says, "More committed to hierarchy than to Edmund Burke's cake of custom, conservatives like Kirk could make their peace with capitalism while weeping for a world lost to avarice." So they made their peace with capitalism early on. There never was even a Burkean conservative force in America that could really push back against the neoliberal type conservatism. And furthermore, Burkean conservatism is really not an ideology in the strictest sense of the word. It's an attitude, it's a disposition, tends to be cautious and all of this. It could not really ultimately serve as a real source of resistance to a very, very strong ideology. So part of the chapter that I want to focus in on deals with these, I guess I would call them prophets of neoliberal capitalism that have been treated practically like demigods in the conservative framework. Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Ayn Rand, and Milton Friedman. They rejected classical conservatism because of its suspicion of science and technology, because all of them were very placed their faith in science and technology, in modernism, but they decided that they would steal conservatism's reverence for mystery and for God, but do it in their own way. So one of the things that they did was create a sort of natural law theory of the market. The market became a field of natural law in which certain economic mechanisms were just facts, and facts that were so solid and so intractable that one had to just submit to them. Never mind the fact that a government has to create the conditions for any sort of market, and that a market is always a agglomeration of human decisions and human actions. But they abstracted from this and basically treated the market as though it was nature itself, and as though we had to basically submit to it. And if we didn't submit to the laws, the natural laws of the market, then we would simply be, by natural law, wiped out. We would be, those who were not successful violated the laws of nature. Okay. He quotes Hayek here as saying, "It was men's submission to the impersonal forces of the market that in the past has made possible the growth of civilization." Okay, now step back and just ask yourself if that's a statement that's truly compatible with Christianity. Try to abstract all your prejudices away, if you have them, and just ask yourself, is it good to speak in terms of men's submission to the impersonal forces of the market, or submission to anything else that isn't God from the Judeo-Christian perspective? It's problematic, and that's I just want people to kind of continue to focus on that. Even if you're not a believer in a higher power, this ought to be concerning to you, because there are many, if not most people, starting at least in the 20th century and really before then, who started to treat human ideas as though they were gods. And it's a dangerous thing. Here we have on Mises. He says, "As imperishable as Smith's work would remain, even he," and this is McCarraher, Mises lamented in 1957, "could not, quote, free himself from the standards and terminology of traditional ethics, which set limits on material accumulation. Von Mises wanted us to free ourselves from the standards and terminology of traditional ethics, because traditional ethics, which in the European tradition is Judeo-Christian ethics, set limits to market activity, and he couldn't have that. You couldn't set loose those forces of economic dynamism if you had Judeo-Christian ethics standing in the way. Again, I want to point out there's just a contradiction here between the way of thinking of von Mises and Judeo-Christian morality. Respect for God. Ayn Rand, this was one of her more attractive phases, attracted a lot of people who wanted really kind of like simple answers, okay? And really consciously portrayed her economic theory, the economic theory of laissez-faire economics, as a substitute for religion. She very consciously dismissed Christianity as there's a quote there, the best kindergarten for communism possible, because of its value of charity. Charity, according to Rand's way of thinking, limited the possibilities and potentials of the true entrepreneurs of society. She says here in this quote, achievement of your happiness is the only moral purpose of your life, and that happiness, not pain or mindless self-indulgence, is the proof of your moral integrity, since it is the proof and the result of your loyalty to the achievement of your values. That quote is about yourself and your ability to get ahead, the pursuit of your happiness before others. It's the only moral purpose in your life. Again, I ask you, is that a Christian statement? Is that a statement that could be made by anybody from the book tradition? Not without doing so unselfconsciously, right? Not without doing so without really reflecting upon the implications of it. McCarraher is pretty good about getting material out of Rand's letters and journal entries where you really get to see what she really thought, as if she hadn't already done that in her novels and such. Here's another quote up at the top. He says, this is quoting her, a new faith is needed. A definitive, positive set of new values and a new interpretation of life. We will give people a faith, a positive, clear, and consistent system of belief. Objectivism was, as she put it, quote, a spiritual, ethical, philosophical groundwork for the belief in the system of free enterprise. Again, you can abstract away all of the spirituality and the sort of the implication that we're worshiping a different God. But I guess, I got to say, you do it at your peril, right? Like, there's a fundamental mistake being made here. And McCarraher's book does a great job of highlighting that. We sort of wink at this type of language. We say, oh, no, she's really not talking about a faith. She's talking about some sort of enthusiasm. But it's treated like a faith. It functions like a faith. Here we have Hayek. I read his book, A Road to Serfdom, when I was in my 20s. It's a great book. He makes some really great points about totalitarianism, communism, as well as fascism and Nazism. But Hayek's way of thinking itself became incorporated into some other ism. And it is, again, antagonistic to real faith. This is a quote from McCarraher's book, but it's a quote from Hayek. The only religions that have survived, von Hayek said late in his life, are those which support property and the family. Well, this implies that you judge a religion's worth by these more important values, property and the family. And finally, we have Friedman. Milton Friedman dismissed religion very early in his life as constraining and detracting from freedom. And in the documentary Free to Choose, which you can still find on YouTube, you can see Milton Friedman trying to popularize this ultimate faith in the free market as kind of what would give us everything else: happiness, security, fulfillment, a feeling of peace, all of these things. All problems would be solved by the free market. It's an extremely optimistic and quite engaging documentary, because he, as a personality, was quite engaging. He was so very positive. But if you just concentrate a little harder on what he's saying, okay? He's saying, have faith in the market. So, is the market the problem? No, the market is not the problem. The market's been around as long as people have been trading it all. The problem is faith in the market, as though the market and market mentality applied to all spheres of life can save us. That is obviously wrong. It's obviously putting faith in something that can't bear that kind of weight. It's a human invention, not an arena for the laws of nature. It's a human invention that goes wrong, makes mistakes, hurts people as well as helps people. It needs to be somehow brought under the control of human beings for their good. And these ways of thinking are designed to stop people from thinking they can do that. McCarraher says, or quotes Friedman as saying that just as the 19th century liberal was radical, so too must be his modern heir. The truth is, Friedman is right. He was being honest. In its purest form, neoliberal ideology is radical. But it has not turned out to be radical in a good way for a lot of people. All right. I will probably finish up the book next time. I can't make any promises, though, because the best part of the book is actually the last part.